Hey everyone, my name is Michelle Blodgett. I am the manager for Michigan Agriculture in the Classroom and part of the executive planning committee for our virtual conference. We want to welcome you to our 4 o'clock session with Chris Wyatt from Illinois Ag in the Classroom. Chris is the education manager for Illinois Ag in the Classroom, and prior to joining Illinois in January of 2020, Chris was a high school English teacher for 14 years. He also helps his wife run their small specialty crop farm, which they grow primarily cut flowers and microgreens. So I want to thank Chris for joining us today in Illinois. Hopefully the weather's a little bit better than it is here in Michigan. And I am going to turn it over to you, Chris.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. Actually, I'm coming to you from Utah. I'm on vacation with my family, and so I have a nice mountain view out here that I am definitely not used to in Illinois. So it's very hot in Utah right now, but it's pretty great. So I spent my morning at a trout farm. We caught a bunch of rainbow trout that we're going to cook for dinner tonight. So I started my morning with some specialty livestock, and I'm happy to be here this afternoon to talk about some specialty crop things with you as well. So excited to talk about microgreens in the classroom. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, get my presentation pulled up. All right, there we go. So as Michelle said, I'm a microgreen grower myself. It's something that I've done for almost 9 years now. Every single week, I've planted and harvested microgreens on our little farm. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about our farm operation here today, and then give you my context, my story with microgreens, and some suggestions on how you can potentially incorporate microgreens into the classroom. I think there's some really unique opportunities to do that. So I'm excited to be here to talk to you about those. So one thing I want to point out as I talk about this today, I think sometimes a lot of people forget it. In agriculture, context is really, really important. And so everything I talk about today is from my context, from my experience, but there's a whole lot of other ways to do this. So I'm going to give you my story and take it for what it's worth, but it's specifically my context and how I've created my microgreen business. So I work for Illinois Ag in the Classroom. We have a lot of resources available to teachers, not only in Illinois, but we're happy to provide online resources across the country. So at the end of my presentation, I do have a QR code you can scan that takes you to a website that has every single thing I'm going to talk about today, including the slides from my presentation. But if you don't do that, if you go to agintheclassroom.org, you can find the same thing. We have a section for all our presentations, and you can find all the information from that here today. One of the things we do a lot of at Illinois Ag in the Classroom is we have these ag mags, and we're beginning to branch out and have ag mags for basically all different grade levels, K through 12. And so check out those resources. Those are free to Illinois educators, and then we also can give them, we can get them shipped to you at just a cost if you're somewhere else besides Illinois. But lots of resources on our website there to check out. So I'll start with this idea of what are microgreens, because usually when I tell people I grow microgreens, there's maybe 1 or 2 people that know what they are, and some people that kind of pretend they know, and a bunch of other people who they have no idea. They've never heard of them. So if you Google microgreen definition, you're going to get a ton of different definitions. Here's some of the ones that I think work best. So they're young seedlings of edible vegetables and herbs, young and tender edible greens. It's kind of a nice way to think about them. They're simply the versions of vegetables and herbs that are in their tiny sprout form. You can also think of them as the shoots of salad vegetables picked just after the first leaves had developed. One thing I'll caution you against is microgreens are not the same as sprouts. And a lot of times I hear people use those 2 terms interchangeably. Sprouts have a very different definition in terms of food safety. I could not legally grow sprouts on my farm. I would need to be in a licensed, certified facility in order to produce sprouts. And so microgreens are treated like any other leafy green, where I'm doing a harvest cut and packaging them after that harvest cut. And so sprouts are a totally different ballgame as far as food safety is concerned. So this is microgreens in the classroom. I personally would not recommend doing sprouts in the classroom. They're grown in a damp, wet environment. That if you don't do it right is prone to bacterial growth and some issues there. And so microgreens, though, are no riskier to grow than any other vegetable crop that you would grow. So how we recommend people enjoy microgreens are on sandwiches, on salads. We add them to smoothies. You can put them on soup. You can make them into pesto. It's also been scientifically proven that if you add microgreens to your pizza, you can eat twice as much pizza before you feel guilty about it. I totally made up that fact right there. It's harder to know if your jokes land when you're doing things virtually, but that was a joke. They are delicious on pizza, but it does not make pizza any healthier for you, but it does make it better tasting. So to give you some context for my microgreen journey, I have a very, very small microgreen operation. It's part of our farm. I'll show you some pictures from my farm here in a little bit. But our primary crops on our farm are cut flowers. And so to give you some context, so I'm from Illinois. So the average size farm in Illinois is about 375 acres. My entire operation in cultivation, we have about a half acre. And all of my microgreens are actually grown indoors in about an 8x8 grow room. So we do about 10 to 15 trays a week. We've grown them every single week for the past 8 years. Full disclosure, I decided to pause growing microgreens this week while my family was on vacation. And so this is the first weekend, I think, since my farm started 9 years ago, since we have not been growing microgreens actively. We market all of our flowers direct to consumer, and then all of our microgreens we sell wholesale. And so we sell in clamshells to grocery stores. We sell in half-pound bulk quantities to restaurants and catering companies within about a 30-mile radius of where our farm is. And so for us, microgreens are a little bit of work every single day. They're a little bit more work on planting day and on harvesting and delivery day, but the days in between, it's very little work in between there. And for us in Illinois, it's the only year-round crop we have on our farm. And so we're able to have some farm income every week of the year. So again, just to give you some context, I live in corn and soybean country. And so again, gross margins are different than net, but our gross margins on our microgreen operation are similar to what a farmer growing corn would make on 30 acres of corn. So again, gross and net are different, but that gives you a little bit of context of just how different this business model is in terms of production agriculture. So here's a Google map here. This is pretty standard for Illinois, right? We have field after field after field of mostly corn and soybeans. That's what the majority of what we grow in Illinois is. And so about 75% of the land in Illinois is used specifically for production agriculture. So we're known for corn and soybeans. We're #1 in pumpkins. We're #4 in pork production. We're also #1 in horseradish, mostly down in the St. Louis area. Definitely not known for microgreen production. So here's my tiny little farm. So you can see we have a mixture of some annual and perennial flower fields. We have a couple of unheated hoop houses. And then, as I said before, I convinced my wife, getting close to 9 years ago, I convinced her that we lived in the city in Bloomington Normal in central Illinois. And I convinced her that we needed to move to the country and start this little farm. And we thought it was going to be a vegetable operation at the time. And so we thought it would take us a couple of years to find a house. We literally bought the first property we found because it checked all the boxes off. We had an 18-month-old son at the time and just decided to just do this crazy thing. I can tell you, no one has ever regretted buying a 120-year-old farmhouse. It's stress-free. There's nothing could possibly go wrong. So let me tell you, it's been a real smooth sailing here the last 9 years. But this is our operation today here. And so it's interesting because when we look at where we make our money, so if you look at per square foot, we make the most money growing microgreens, which are literally in our basement. So we didn't even need to buy this big 4-acre property. I could have done this in our house in town here. But the interesting thing about this, when the satellite flew over our farm, you can see this wet spot in our gravel, and it's either my wife or I are sanitizing microgreen trays. And so it was good timing for them to fly over and see that idea. As I said, the microgreens are a little bit of work every single day for us. And so that gives you a little bit of context for my farm operation. So back to my basement, and this is my microgreen setup. I'm going to go into more detail on this as I continue on, but I just wanted to give you a preview of it. You can see I've got racks here, I've got LED lights, and for each of those light sections, I have 4 trays of microgreens growing underneath of them. So I'll go into more detail with that, but that just gives you kind of an idea of what my setup looks like. I will tell you, I have a very basic setup. There is nothing fancy and it works just fine. So as I talk about kind of ways to go from how I do things from a production standpoint and how we can adapt those to the classroom, I'll reinforce that idea that this is a very low tech kind of thing I've got going here. So So it begs the question, why microgreens? Why are these a thing? Why bother with them? So, you know, if I wanted to grow broccoli, why don't I just grow broccoli for 60 days and get a whole head of broccoli? Why do I plant a ton of broccoli and get this tiny little seedling? What's the point? So there are some studies that suggest some nutritional benefits to microgreens. So based on a 2014 USDA study, there's evidence that microgreens have up to 5 times the various vitamins as their adult counterparts. So the idea is that those seeds themselves have all this nutrition meant for the entire plant. And when you grow it in a teeny tiny microgreen form, you're getting all those vitamins and minerals that were intended for this giant plant. So you're going to get a lot more of those in a small package. I think too, if we think about an entry point for small scale producers, if you have limited space or infrastructure or limited capital, microgreens are a really easy way to get into a market space and kind of, you know, dip your toes in the water of production agriculture, especially if you're wanting to say sell at a farmer's market. You know, you can literally plant and harvest within a 10-day period and have a crop ready to sell, as opposed to, you know, most of our cut flowers on our farm, we're looking at maybe 90 to 100 days before we have a crop that we're ready to sell. Microgreens are also still super trendy. That you find them at a lot of different places. We were down at the in-person National Ag in the Classroom conference in Florida a few weeks ago, and went to a couple restaurants that had microgreen cilantro and some other things that they were serving on their food. So it's still very much a trendy thing. And then again, depending, no matter where you are across the country, microgreens give you an option of year-round production, which is a pretty cool thing as well. When we think about why the classroom, why do microgreens have a good fit in the classroom? It's for some of the same reasons. They're a quick seed to harvest turnaround. So, you know, in Illinois, we don't have a very robust school garden program, mostly because our prime gardening months are May, June, and July, when all the kids are at home. And so unless you have a teacher who wants to spend to go for the students when they get back in the fall, they really can't get that full experience of growing crops in the garden. And so microgreens allow for, you know, a 10-day turnaround where a teacher, especially a teacher who doesn't want to take on this massive gardening project, they're able to do a lesson that incorporates all these different things related to growing crops in a really short period of time. So I think for a lot of teachers, there's something to be said for that, to have it in a package that's easy for them to do in 2 weeks in the classroom, and they can move on with something else. I think too, if you want to think of ways to introduce students to a variety of specialty crops, again, in a short period of time, microgreens are a great way to do that. There are dozens and dozens of crops you can grow as microgreens, and it opens those conversations with students about what they're eating and what parts of the plant they're eating, and all sorts of things we can do through microgreens, and talk about all these other specialty crops as well. Also, if you're wanting to incorporate different cultures and foods from around the world into your classroom, microgreens pair well and can connect with all sorts of multicultural things as far as food and eating go. And so I think there's a lot of potential with microgreens there as well. So a lot of good reasons to bring microgreens into the classroom with a variety of age groups of students. So on this slide, I could have put 2 or 3 times as many crops on this slide, but these are some really good ones to begin with. And the ones that I put an asterisk next to are the best for beginners, in my opinion. So the ones on the left-hand side of the screen are what you'd consider mostly leafy greens. That's typically, for the most part, that's what they are. There's a couple ones that are different. For instance, radish is typically grown as a root crop. Nasturtium is a flower. You may have, some people plant nasturtiums around squash to keep away squash bugs and other things, but nasturtium microgreens have a really peppery taste to them. They're pretty interesting. The middle column are what you'd call shoots, and so these are typically larger seeds. Most of the time, microgreen shoots have seeds that need to be pre-soaked, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But peas and sunflowers are super popular and are really easy to grow. And then on the right-hand side, that column are herbs. There's many different herbs you can grow as microgreens. They do have slightly different flavor profiles and textures than their adult counterparts. You'll notice I don't have any of the herbs asterisk because they take a decent amount of time to grow. And so they're not, for beginners, they take a little bit more care and a little bit more time. So I'd recommend some of the other ones in the other 2 columns before going with herbs. One thing I'll say with when you're buying seeds from microgreens, you want to get seeds that are marketed as microgreen seed. There's a lot of different companies that offer this. The prices vary wildly. So look around, there's plenty of options, but the reason you want microgreen seeds, it's not because they're a different variety or anything like that, but it's two reasons. One is the cost. Microgreen seeds are marketed at a much lower cost per ounce or per pound, however you're buying them. For instance, if I plant a tray of broccoli microgreens, if I was to buy that seed in little seed packets, I'd probably spend 20, 30, maybe more dollars on one tray of broccoli seeds. I buy it as microgreen seeds, and I buy it at 5 or 10 pounds at a time, and I spend maybe $1.25 for an entire tray of broccoli microgreen seed. And so it's they're sold very different price points. The other reason that you want to get microgreen seeds is they're food grade seeds. And so sunflowers are a really good example. A lot of sunflowers are grown for the birdseed market. Those are not considered food grade for humans. And so you want to make sure you're getting seeds that are intended for crops for human consumption. They've been treated appropriately to allow that, especially something like microgreens that you're eating fresh. You're typically not cooking microgreens. So you want to make sure you buy seeds that are appropriate for that. So definitely shop for microgreen seeds. So I told you I have a 10-day turnaround time period with my microgreens. So I just kind of laid out a few different trays. This is on harvest day. And so you can see these are radishes here on the left after 10 days of growing under the grow lights. This one on the right is our broccoli and kale mix. We market this as a smoothie mix, and we also blend it with some other things. And I'll kind of talk about some possibilities with that too, but it works really well in smoothies. It's also similar to like a mild mix. It's a pretty good entry point for microgreens as well. Here's peas that are 10 days old. Peas have they taste like pea and lettuce had a baby is kind of the best way I can describe it. They have a really great flavor to them. You can see you get a lot of growth in a 10-day period from peas. They also make a really great pesto that's pretty interesting as well. I also gave you a picture of Swiss chard. This is a really fun microgreen to grow. I personally don't like the taste of adult Swiss chard. It just is not an appealing flavor to me. But microgreen Swiss chard tastes a little different, and it's beautiful to add to mixes. And so it's the only crop I grow that is more than 10 days. It takes more like 20 days to grow. I have a country club that buys from us every week, and they wanted something unique for them. And so I added Swiss chard to our mild mix, and I named it Unicorn Sprinkles, and they've gone crazy over it. They buy it every single week. And so they really like that. And so there's lots of cool ways to kind of add some of those details and add some of those things to make your stuff stand out and kind of have a cool variety with that. Okay, so that's some kind of basics. I'll circle back to talking more about how I actually grow these things and how I produce them, but I want to kind of connect to some classroom concepts so you can kind of get an idea of why do all this. And so one of the concepts I think is really great to connect with microgreens is photosynthesis. And especially typically microgreens are grown indoors under grow lights. They don't have to be, but that allows you to streamline your production. Like for me, I need to make sure that I plant on a certain day and I can harvest on a certain day. And I want to take out as many variables as I can. And so growing them indoors allows me to do that. So in the classroom, there's a whole bunch of varieties of trials that you could complete. You could do things with different types of grow lights, different styles of grow lights. You could have some that grow next to the window that aren't under a grow light. You can ask students, think about how does this process of photosynthesis, how does it change the flavor of things, right? I can tell you the crop here on the right are popcorn shoots. You'll notice they're yellow. They've been grown in total darkness. Popcorn shoots are one of the most uniquely sweet things you will ever taste. I can't even describe the flavor of it. It's absolutely incredible. It's unlike anything I've ever tasted before. Popcorn shoots that have been grown under grow lights and have chlorophyll in them from that photosynthesis process, they taste disgusting. They're super bitter. They're basically inedible. And so it's a really cool thing to think about how that process of photosynthesis has changed the flavor of those. Peas, you can do the same thing. Peas that have been grown in darkness taste more like a bean sprout. And then peas grown under the grow lights taste like you would expect a full-grown pea to taste. So you can also do some cool things with the number of hours to think of, a lot of people would think that, oh, if I just grow with the lights on 24/7, they're going to grow even faster. And I can tell you that absolutely is not the case. There's no need to do that. And so there's a lot of cool experiments and inquiry activities you could do in the classroom, thinking about this idea of lighting and how long and what intensity and things like that. There's lots of opportunities too to get students to think about seed germination. Thinking about how long they take to germinate. Do they need to be covered by soil? Typically, if we think about gardening, we're gonna, use our hoe, we're gonna dig a trench, we're gonna cover up our seeds, and they're gonna be in darkness. With the exception of the Swiss chard, every single microgreen I grow, I do not bury the seed. And so I put them on top, just as these pictures show here. The one on the top are sunflower shoots, and the bottom are pea shoots growing. And so none of them are buried under the soil at all. And so we can get students to think about, well, why is that? Why do they not get buried here, but we would bury them if we grew them outside? I can tell you as far as microgreen growing goes, one, I don't need to bury them. So it's an extra step I don't have to do. But also, if the seeds are on top of the soil, and then they're going to grow up and they're going to be a little bit cleaner. And so microgreens, if you wash microgreens, you can really shorten the shelf life of them. And so a lot of growers don't wash them, but they put on the packaging that, hey, the final consumer should wash them before they consume them. And so I want my microgreens to be as absolutely clean as possible, because I'm not going to wash them, but I want them to go into the clamshell without any dirt on them. So by putting them on top of the soil, I allow that to not be a problem. We can also get students to think about pre-soaking seeds and this idea of how can we shorten that germination time period. So for both peas and sunflowers, I would pre-soak them for about 6 to 8 hours in water. And in some cases, I would also disinfect the seed, especially sunflowers are really prone to mold. And so you can disinfect them with a solution of food grade hydrogen peroxide and white vinegar and water, and let them sit in that for about 5 minutes. And it really greatly reduces the chance of mold coming in and ruining that seed. So there's lots of things we can kind of talk to students about, that idea of what does that process look like if we pre-soak them or just plant them, that kind of thing. It's also cool because they're on top of the surface of the soil that students can actually see all the plant parts coming out, and they can see that process. For a lot of students, they've maybe never seen a plant start to grow ever. So it's a really cool way to introduce that. My very first tray of microgreens I grew, I had no idea what I was doing. And I watched all these YouTube videos. I thought I'd try it out. And I took the lid off the tray, and it was all what I thought was white mold covering the whole tray. And I threw it out, and I started over and tried again. Well, it wasn't white mold. It was all the root hairs from all those seeds coming out, and it almost makes like a mat of root hairs. And so it looks like it's icky. It looks bad. And then if I'd let it go for a day or two, I would have realized, no, those seeds are all germinating and they're coming up and everything's just fine. So again, under a microscope, if you have access to that in your classroom, you could do some cool things with that. The other thing I like with this is this idea of the strength that seeds have, like the power that's hidden within seeds. And so this is how I grow the microgreens when I planted them. And so I sprinkle them on top of the surface of the soil. I water them down, and I stack them 4 trays high. And then I put an empty tray on top, and I put a 10-pound landscaping block on the very top of it. And then depending on the seeds, usually 2 to 4 days later, I will take that block off and then lay them out on the trays, or on my growing trays. The reason I do this is because I want that seed to soil contact. I'm not burying the seeds, and so I need to make sure those seeds have direct contact with the soil. So this is an efficient way to do that. But you can see in the picture on the right, this is after I planted the one on the left is probably, I would have planted on a Saturday. That's probably like Sunday night or Monday. And then the one on the right is like Tuesday night. And so you can see in like a 3.5 day period, those seeds have grown dramatically. And I can tell you from experience, if I would have left that block on there for another day, it would have pushed that 10-pound block over and dropped it on the floor and shattered it. And so you're looking at about total, it's about maybe 5 ounces of seed that in 4 days time can lift a 10-pound brick and push it off of itself. That's amazing, right? This idea that the strength that seeds have inside of them to fight for life. And I think that's really cool. And so to be able to demonstrate that with students, I think is kind of a cool thing to show them just how much power is lurking inside these seeds. We can also look at different seed types with students and how we might need to treat different seeds differently. So I told you on this picture in the upper right, these are sunflower shoots. And so I would typically pre-soak those seeds. The bottom left picture are pea seeds. You can tell like the first picture is unsoaked, and then the last picture is probably about 6 to 8 hours in the water solution. You can see they about double in size. There's also some really interesting looking seeds. And so like these seeds right here down the bottom middle are Swiss chard seeds. And you can see they're really jagged and angular. And when I started growing them, I had a lot of issues because those seed holes would stick on top of the greens when they would grow. And I would have to go in and pick them off individually. And undoubtedly, you don't get them all. And so then as you're eating your salad or whatever, you get this weird crunch that isn't too appetizing. And so what I found was if I covered the seeds, I told you almost everything else, I don't cover it, but if I covered Swiss chard seeds, the action of having to push up through the soil would pull the seed holes off, and I have almost none that I have to pull off the plants now. And so again, you can kind of use these efficiencies to help you and kind of get students can think about how plants might grow differently depending on how we plant them or how we treat them. The one on the bottom right are cilantro seeds. So if you didn't know, when you buy coriander in the grocery store as a seasoning, coriander are seeds from cilantro. And so typically for growers, especially if you're growing cilantro as a microgreen, you're going to buy what are called splits. And so that coriander seed is not actually a seed, it's a seed pod, and it has multiple seeds inside of it. And so I buy splits that they've been mechanically broken apart, and it allows for a lot better germination rate on those seeds. You could get students to do this as well. If you take like 2 paper plates and put the seeds between the paper plates, and if you they could use their hand or even like a metal bowl, and you can push down and you can actually get those seed holes to shatter. And then that would be a great experiment to see if we do nothing and we plant this coriander seed, how does it germinate versus if we split the seed first and then grow it, how many more plants do we get to grow because we split that seed hole open? So wide variety of seed types that you can get students to investigate and try their hand at growing them. Okay, so a ton of different classroom connections we can make with that. And so I want to talk a little bit about my setup and how that can kind of feed into potentially a classroom setup here. So I have a basic setup. I built these racks out of 2x3 lumber, just from the lumber store and plywood. My lights are 4-foot LED tube lighting that you can link up to 4 of them together. And so LED lights are recommended. You can see on the right here, I do have some fluorescent lights I use as well. LED just uses considerably less electricity. These ones on the left too are, they're just like a blue and a purple light. And so the idea is that it only has the wavelength or the frequencies of lighting that plants need for growth. I don't know. I mean, I think they're maybe a little bit more efficient, but keep in mind, microgreens are only under lights for 10 days. And actually they're only under the lights for about 7 of those 10 days. So it's a very short period of time. I grow all of our transplants, our flower transplants for our flower side of our operation in this setup as well. So for my flowers, I put my lights really close because I don't want them to get real leggy and have weak stems. But you'll notice the picture with the fluorescent lights where I've got Swiss chard and pea shoots growing, that light is easily 16, 18 inches away, because I don't care if these stretch because it actually gives me more of a marketable product, especially with peas. They'll stretch a lot more if my light's up higher and I have more that I can harvest and market in that time period. And so I can keep the lights much further away without any issue, right? So I got 3 rows of lighting here. You'll notice too that I have these trays underneath, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. So in the nursery industry, a 1020 is kind of the standard tray size, and all that means is it's 10 inches wide and 20 inches long. So I use what's called a shallow 1020 because they're only about an inch and a quarter tall, because I don't need 2 or 3 inches of soil to grow these microgreens. I want to use as little soil as possible. So I use shallows. I get them with holes in them because I mostly bottom water my microgreens. So this is a bottom watering tray. There's a wide variety of these on the market. I have these jumbo sized ones that can fit 4 of these 1020s at once. And the reason I bottom water for the most part is because if you think about the way microgreens are grown, it's a lot of seeds all right together. And if you don't have good ventilation, if things are staying really damp or moist, it invites issues with mold. And no matter how good you get at growing microgreens, every once in a while, some factor is going to change and you're going to have some mold show up, and then you're probably going to have to just junk that whole tray and start over. So if I can keep my greens as dry as possible when they're growing, I'm going to do that. And so I have multiple fans going on my microgreens all the time, but then I also am using these bottom watering trays that allow them to just wick the moisture up from the bottom. This is also key if you're doing this in a classroom setting. You don't want to have to be coming on the weekends to water, because I typically water every single day, but theoretically I could overwater on, say, Friday afternoon and have those trays kind of sitting in some moisture. It would take a couple of days for them to fully wick it up. And then when I get back to school Monday morning, I'd be in business still and they'd be just fine. So it allows for a little more flexibility with that watering schedule if you're watering from the bottom as well. All that being said, you can literally grow microgreens in anything. So these are called clamshells. It's just the clear plastic containers that you'd buy, salad mixes and things like that in at the store. That's what we market our harvested microgreens in. Those would make great planting containers. Any kind of deli container, think about things that are going to get thrown away anyway that you could recycle. Those would all work just fine to grow microgreens in. And especially in a classroom setting, if you want each student to have their own or that kind of thing, or you want a wide variety, you don't need this massive 10-inch by 20-inch tray each time you grow. You might be better off having students grow these kind of smaller container sizes as well. For potting media, I use just the basic ProMix potting soil. It's readily available at garden centers around me. Each one weighs about 40 pounds, and I have to haul all that down to my basement. And then I end up hauling all of it back up in the trays with the grown microgreens. And so I need something I can do that pretty easily with. So that's why I use ProMix. You can see here, this is just a big Rubbermaid tote, and I made a frame with hardware cloth above it. And so I just push the potting soil through it, and it just breaks it up and makes it kind of a finer mix. Probably not super necessary, but again, I want things to be dialed in where I do it the exact same way every time. And so I found this works really well for consistency for me, so I take that extra step. If you're interested in going soilless, there are these hydroponic growing mats that are typically hemp-based. I've not used them myself. I know that they are increasing in popularity, and they're absolutely an option as well. And so if you're interested in not having a bunch of soil in your classroom, these hemp mats might be a good option for that. There's a lot of companies that are starting to market trays specifically for microgreens that are double layered, where you would have, say, one of these mats on the top layer and a wick that comes down. So you fill the bottom container with water and then it wicks it up as you need it. So there's some options there as well. They're just a little pricier than the standard trays, but they're definitely an option for the classroom. Only other supplies you really need, I talked about having some kind of ventilation, so some kind of box fan on those microgreens is essential. You need a watering wand that's a breakaway water, so it's not going to flood that tray. It needs to be a gentle rain, and so I use Wonder Waterers. I think they're great. I haven't found one I like better. And then I told you I have a super high-tech setup here, and so this is literally a sled that I took from my son used to use it to ride down the hill in the snow. I took it, and now it works perfectly for potting up these trays. And so you can see this is just a basic livestock feed scoop. And then this is a piece of plywood I cut to be just slightly smaller than the tray. And I took the handle off of an old concrete trowel and nailed it into it. And so once I pour the potting soil into the tray, I smooth it out with my hand, and then I just gently press with that wooden press just to even out that layer of soil. And so it's pushed down a little bit and ready for those seeds to make contact with it. And then I carry it over, I water it, I sprinkle my seeds out. I literally use like a solo cup is my how I spread the seed onto the trays. And so I weigh the seed out, sprinkle it on and water it, and then I stack the trays and I'm done. So really basic setup there. So depending on what seed you're growing, you're going to have different volumes of seed you're going to use. So I do everything by weight. I know for most of the things I grow, I need 1.27 ounces. That's the amount of seed I want to plant on a 10-20 tray. And then you can see on the last column there, within a 10-day period, I'm going to go from about 1.25 ounces of seed to 8 to 10 ounces of greens that I can harvest. Peas and sunflowers are obviously very different. They're much larger seeds. And so for peas, I can go from 10 ounces of seed to 2 pounds, sometimes more than 2 pounds of pea shoots on one tray. So again, this is something that in a classroom situation, you would want to experiment with and see what worked. And that would be a great way to involve students in that process. So I just use a standard kitchen scale to weigh those out and to do that. Many of these things can be grown as mixes too. So like, especially the leafy greens, like you could grow, say, broccoli, kale, kohlrabi all together. And then what I do is I take that mix and I add mustard seed to it, which makes it my spicy mix. And so there's lots of cool flavor combinations you can do, again, growing them all in the same tray. So there's some cool things to do there too. So if you're looking at doing this in the classroom, here's how I would do it. I would plant and stack the trays on a Monday. That Thursday, I would unstack them. I would water them on top and on bottom that first day. And then from that point on, I would only bottom water them every time. And then by the following Wednesday or Thursday, they'd be ready to harvest. So again, as I said earlier, for a teacher, this is a really quick turnaround where we can do a lot of things involving planting and growing things in a short period of time. Okay, so my last section I want to connect to some lessons here. None of these are specifically microgreen lessons, but I'll give you kind of some twists to them that can make them work with microgreens. So if you've ever done a plant maze using a shoebox and kids create a maze for a plant to grow up through to see how it goes towards the light. If you use pea shoots, it works really, really well with this. It takes less than a week to get a pea shoot to grow all the way up through a shoebox. And so those work great. If you pre-soak the peas for about 6 to 8 hours ahead of time, that's going to take a couple days off of your germination, and you're going to be a lot more successful with that. And so plant maze is a great one for that. There's some cool things too you could do with, you could add a light on top. You could just have the ambient light from the classroom and see if that changes how quickly the plants are able to go up and find the light. So that's an easy one to kind of incorporate some microgreen stuff into. Tops and Bottoms, if you're familiar with this book, it's a great book. We've used it for years at Illinois Ag in the Classroom. It's basically how we interpret it is it's a way for kids to learn about the different parts of the plant that we eat. And so you can see there's a little paper plate thing where you can see these plants we eat the leaves, these plants we eat the roots, that kind of thing. Using microgreens with that concept, you can kind of turn that on its head. And so the pictures of these over here, these are radish microgreens that are about 10 days old. That's the green part, basically. You can also grow radishes in a regular, like a 72 cell tray. And, this is a 10-day crop. The microgreens, these radishes down here are probably a 25-day crop, but absolutely could grow them under a grow light situation in your classroom. And so cool to kind of look at, hey, when we grow a crop this way, we eat this part of it. When we grow a crop a little bit longer and a little different way, we're actually eating the root of it now. And so a cool way for students to kind of see that what they thought was, oh, I only can eat this one part of this plant. Well, actually, you can eat a lot of different parts of the plant. Carrots are another good example. Like if you've ever had carrot top pesto, most of the time people throw out the carrot greens. You can actually eat those too. So some cool conversations to have with students there too about plant parts and how we consume those. We also have this plant parts logic puzzle that's on our website. And so it's part of a bigger lesson, but basically getting kids to think about which part of the plant that we eat. And so this paper here is your farmer's market shopping bag. And then they have all these tiles and they have to match up the root crops with the root crops and the leafy greens with the leafy greens and that kind of thing. And then you have to make it so you can fill up your entire shopping bag by matching all that. So a good way to talk about what those different parts of the plant are, and then kind of challenge them with kind of a logic math kind of puzzle as well. And we've got a couple different versions of that for multiple age groups as well. Ins and outs is another one we developed in this last year, where we have these different cards and it gives students the name of it. So say it says peach, and then there's a picture of a peach tree and a picture of the crop we get from it, which is the peach itself. And then there's a close-up of what the inside of that crop looks like. And so students have to match them together and figure out which one is which and how they go together. So a good way to get them thinking about what these plants look like growing that they maybe have never seen the actual plant itself. Cilantro cuisine is a good one to bring in some multicultural elements. Cilantro leaves are used often in Hispanic cooking. The seeds are often used in Indian cooking, so we can kind of bring in some of those different cultures in there as well. This lesson also has a whole thing about the different parts of the plant and investigating that as well. So that's a good one for slightly younger groups, but could work for an older audience as well. We also have a design your own farmers market booth activity that has all these different templates that students can use to kind of design a farm brand and design their farmers market booth. And so this activity is on the back of our new farmers market ag mag. And then we also have a bigger version of it that's available on our website too. So an easy way to kind of, if students are growing microgreens in the classroom, they could design their farmers market booth with all their different microgreens and show how they would sell those things. We also have an activity. This is an erosion simulator that we bought, and it's cool. It has the ramps with that stair step, and so you can do some cool things with angles. It's kind of expensive. You could also just take 2-liter bottles and cut them horizontally and do something similar. But I like this because these are radish microgreens, and so radish microgreens are typically daikon radishes, which you may have seen in the grocery store. They're a really long white root. They're used in various cultures for cooking. Radishes, and specifically daikon radishes, are also used as a cover crop. And so farmers will plant radishes in the fall, and they have a really, really long taproot that goes way down into the soil. And it's called a scavenger because the idea is it's going to pull up nutrients and minerals and things from the lower levels of the soil, bring them up into the topsoil layer, and then you let that radish die and decompose, and then all those nutrients are there readily available for the next cash crop for the following cycle. And so it's a cool way. It also is called a tillage radish because it actually creates these big holes that allow water and air to penetrate the soil without actually tilling the soil. And so, again, a cool way to kind of connect this idea of we can grow this crop as a microgreen, we can grow this crop for human consumption, we can also use it as a crop that aids in soil health and things like that as well, and reduces erosion as well. And so there's kind of some cool connections there talking about sustainability and conservation there as well. All right, that was a lot. So everything I talked about is on this QR code here. If you scan that, it will take you straight to the page that has everything from this presentation, all the resources and lessons and all that stuff. And then I think Michelle's back here, so we have a couple minutes to answer some questions too. So thank you so much. I hope you got an introduction to microgreens and got some cool ideas on how you can potentially incorporate those into your classroom this next year.
That was awesome, Chris. Thank you so much. Gotta make sure I'm on here. We did have one question in there, and I may have missed it because I had to pop out for a second. But when you harvest them, do you just cut them like grass?
Oh, good. Yeah, I didn't talk about that. Yeah, so I use a chef's knife is how I harvest them, and so I kind of get a handful cut, and basically I can harvest a whole tray, and then I'll just stack another tray on top and just continue the. But in the work great. Scissors there already. And then if you go to a pharmacy, you can get a spray bottle of isopropyl alcohol. And if you spray the scissors, it will sanitize the scissor blades before you use it to harvest. And so I would recommend doing that. But yeah, scissors work just as fine.
Awesome. Awesome. We have one person that just came in here. I came a little late. Where's the best place to purchase microgreen seeds? Do you have any recommendations?
There are a lot of places. I really like Johnny's Selected Seeds. They're out of Maine. Their prices are fairly high, but they have the best variety, I think. Another good one to look at is called True Leaf Market. They have a pretty good selection as well. And there's a lot more. There's other ones out there as well, but those are two that I've used.
Awesome. Any other questions? We got a few minutes here. For me, it was interesting to learn the difference between greens and sprouts.
Yeah.
And like you said, the bacterial growth, like once you talk about it, yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, you don't want to mess around with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
So awesome. Well, if there's no more questions, I want to thank Chris for his time. Let him get back to his vacation in Utah and enjoy that dry heat.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. And I know not only myself, but a lot of our attendees appreciate the information. And as you said, it's still trending. We know from being in person and virtual, there's a lot of us that are interested about it and look forward to seeing what teachers do with this when they take it back to their classroom. So I want to thank Chris for his time, and thank you to our sponsors, BASF and the CHS Foundation and Corteva Agriscience. Our next and last final presentation will start at the top of the hour. If you want to learn about Journey 2050 and learn about all the amazing new pieces of Journey 2050, including the U.S. farm, Please stay on, and we will start at the top of the hour at 5 o'clock with Journey 2050. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.